Okay, Dean Legge Show. This time, September, early September. Let's just put it that way. Georgia falls to Clemson 38-35. This week, the Bulldogs take on South Carolina in what is a very pivotal SEC East matchup. South Carolina's won the last 3 games in this series, as most people know, and this week, we'll talk a little bit about the Clemson game, then we'll go straight into South Carolina. A lot of disappointment, not necessarily because Georgia played quote-unquote bad, but that they lost. And, I think Clemson played great. I really do, and I don't, you can't take anything away from them. They basically they made their field goal, and I think that's what happens sometimes when you make that was a self-inflicted wound there, not getting that field goal. Georgia came very close to taking the lead at that point. That field goal would have just tied it, but I think if they get the lead there, it's tough for it might be tough for Clemson to come back to win the game. But they had their chance too in the second quarter, so to put a 2-score advantage on Clemson, they never did quite do that, and they lost the first game of the season. But as I think everybody is well aware, that game is very meaningless at this stage for a lot of different reasons, but mainly because Georgia needs to concentrate on the SEC. You can handle business in the SEC, and you won't have problems with your postseason destination. I think we've all seen that in years gone by. 1-loss, 2-loss SEC teams can win the national championship. So Georgia will try to start doing that this week, and they'll have a challenge in their hand. I mean, like I said, South Carolina, I thought looked efficient but not great against North Carolina. Obviously, a lot of national hubbub on Jadeveon Clowney's performance or lack thereof against North Carolina. Georgia people would have you believe inside the program that Clowney performed really well. It's just that when the cameras were on him, they showed him gassed. Well, the camera doesn't lie, so it's probably somewhere in between. And Georgia hadn't really seen a bad game from Jadeveon Clowney yet, so. I don't know why they'd expect one this time either. The good news for Georgia is there's no Marcus Lattimore, and South Carolina is 3-0 with him. Without him, they only won 1 game in about the last 8 with Georgia. So the run game has really made a big difference, and that's where we're going to take our first question of the night, and that's from Tank Dog. These names sometimes. He says, or he or she says, I thought Mike Davis and Wiles both looked good against North Carolina. What's your take on those two against Georgia's defense? And what's your opinion on the key to beating South Carolina? Well, it's definitely the run game. And Mike Davis, an Atlanta area guy, showed some serious explosiveness on the 175-yard or whatever it was touchdown for South Carolina. That really put the game out of hand. So I think if Georgia can sort of slow those guys down, I mean, I think they're pretty good running backs. They're not what Marcus Lattimore has been, so that will be the question: Can Georgia stop people on defense? That's not yet been established. My guess is with Josh Harvey Clemens coming in, that could give them a little bit more physical presence near the line of scrimmage if they want that. I know he's a safety, but if they want that, that could be something that they'd be eager to try to exploit against South Carolina. Then you got to defend the pass, but you might take that risk that you give up big plays, but maybe you slow the run down a little bit. That really is, to me, the key to the game. I mean, the obvious exceptions being turnovers and penalties. I mean, the team that's run better in this game has won the game. That's not new. That's been going on forever. The team that has turnovers definitely loses this game a lot. 1996, 2001, 2000, 2009, 2011. You can't turn the ball over in this game and win it. These two teams, South Carolina is really picked up sort of where Tennessee left off in the grand scheme of the SEC, and they have become sort of one of the top 3 in the East. And in order to beat Tennessee back in the day, you really had to perform, and that's what's going on with South Carolina right now. Next question. Do you think the coaches were surprised how little Aaron Murray was protected? Several on the offensive line just seemed to fall down or go for for a kind of a clip block, I guess you could say. How do you think Georgia stops South Carolina's penetration? Well, I don't think they'll stop Jadeveon Clowney. I don't think anybody. I think people who have that going in their brain are going to have a disappointing Saturday. But I think that they might have been a little bit disappointed that Georgia couldn't protect a little bit better on the line. But, I don't know how much criticism you really want to put at the offensive line's feet. I think they didn't play as well as they could have played necessarily. 4 sacks. People start getting bent out of shape about sacks sometimes. Still a group that put up 35 points, and that wasn't by accident. I think a lot of the overall complaining would be gone had Georgia won the game. I mean, obviously. And that's the goal this week. How do you stop South Carolina's penetration? My guess is that we are going to see some screens and some draws, maybe a pistol or two formation, just to see what South Carolina will do. It looks like the left side of the line will have Colton Houston in it at left guard. That's what it looks like. So if that's the case, that might just be another body that will be on that side that they hope can handle him a little bit better. But listen, Canarius Gates is just going to have to do it. I mean, that's all there is to it. Sometimes you're overmatched, and you just got to do anything you can do. I mean, you untie their shoelaces. You do whatever you can do to slow guys down. Some of that will be play calling with draws. Some of that will be Quavon Hicks running, like a rocket man at Jadeveon Clowney. But I mean, he's not all they've got. They have a very good defensive line, and it's going to be, it's going to need to be a fair amount of run for Georgia. I mean, if they have less than 100 yards rushing, they're not going to win the game. I mean, it would be odd if they won the game if they had less than 100 yards rushing. So, the last team to beat Georgia at home was South Carolina 2 years ago. Since then, they've won however many games it is, more than 10 in a row. South Carolina is 4-3 on the road with Connor Shaw as its starter. So this game, people after the Clemson game say, hey, why is Georgia favored? Well, it's stuff like that. And, one player, Todd Gurley, couldn't beat Clemson. The question is now, can one player, Jadeveon Clowney, beat Georgia? The answer should be no. But Jadeveon Clowney is pretty good, so let's not fool ourselves. Do you think Georgia should run more out of the I formation? Do you think the players understand the gravity of this game? Well, I mean, I really don't want to insult the players by even commenting on that. Do you think Georgia should run out of the I formation more? I mean, I think whatever works. And I think people who criticize Mike Bobo should be careful because they're going to look stupid. And, Georgia's really scored a ton of points through the years with Mike Bobo. They've lost 3 games with Mike Bobo when his teams have scored 35 points or more. One was to South Carolina in 2010, which had virtually nothing to do with the offense's production, 42 points. That really was a game that was lost on special teams and, offensive turnovers. And really you can just say special teams, for God's sakes. I mean, you fake punt for a touchdown, that Georgia's got to win the special teams against South Carolina. That hasn't happened the last 2 years. South Carolina's had 2 special teams touchdowns at a minimum against Georgia these last 2 years. I mean, that adds up. Certainly did in 2011, and that was a game Georgia should have won, and they didn't. And it really, they'd have been. You go back to 2011. They don't lose that South Carolina game. They lost that game by 3 points. They don't lose that South Carolina game. They're going into the LSU game probably with a chance to play for the national championship. So, they got to be a little bit more judicious on special teams. That's going to be very important for them. But as far as the I formation is concerned, look, I like the I formation. It gives you a lot of options. You can use it. You can use a tight end if you want to. You can use 3 receivers if you want to. Basically, I formation just means you got a fullback in there. When you have a fullback as dynamic as Quavon Hicks apparently is, then you use it. But look, I'm not a coordinator. Neither is anybody watching this. I think the production has been very good on the offensive side of the ball. Nothing to complain about the I formation or anything that Bobo calls or anything. You get into all that, after a while, it's just kind of silly. I mean, to me. Either you win or you don't, and you can nitpick if you want to, and that's fine. Or just wait for them to lose a couple of games in a row, and then you can start really killing the team. But that loss to Clemson wasn't a game where you should sort of plant your sword and say, hey, this is what's wrong with the program. That's not a great time to do that. Here's the next question. Will Jonathan Rumpf play? It looks like it. And someone's going to have to step in for Malcolm Mitchell. Someone's going to have to be the down-the-field guy. Georgia didn't throw down the field very much, probably because they couldn't get great protection. It was on the road. I mean, it wasn't any different than it was anywhere else. I got a lot of Clemson people that I know, and they're like, oh, man, it was so loud. It's as loud as it is anywhere. I mean, at some point, if you can't hear, you can't hear. So, that's pretty common, whether you're at LSU or in the Dome, or you're, at Tennessee or Arkansas or Alabama, or, Clemson's it's no different. Georgia Tech's loud. And so, that's the problem with playing on the road, is you gotta adapt to that. So they didn't get the ability to do that. Now, Jonathan Rumpf, I think we all know, has the ability to do some special stuff. The question is he healthy enough to do that? We'll figure that out Saturday. He went up to Clemson, but he did not play. So, that Rumpf could, I'm curious to see what Georgia does when they get home. And he's just one part of it. I mean, he's not the only guy they're getting back, but they need him. I mean, he's a junior college kid. He's supposed to come in right away. He had very high expectations. He's playing his home state school. It's time to go. What happened with Xavier Ward? I thought he had made big strides on the offensive line. Well, this is the common off-season discussion, which is this person has really made a lot of strides. That doesn't mean that they're going to start. That doesn't mean that they're Leonard Floyd, where it's obvious how good they are. That just means that they've gotten better from where they were. John Theus made a lot of strides. It's just that John Theus was a starter. Okay, Todd Gurley seems to be making strides as well. So I think, Georgia's got their guys on the offensive line right this second. Xavier Ward is probably going to have to work himself in later in the season. Right this second is not a great time for instability on the defensive line. Offensive line. Either. This one says, Dean, I was very impressed with the young defensive talent on the field Saturday night. Not an awful performance considering it was one of the top offenses on the road in their first game. However, the struggles continuing against the run are alarming, and this is not a new issue. The question is, will this defense ever be able to stop the run? Is the problem the scheme issue? Is the problem a scheme issue or a fundamentals issue? The problem is they're playing with guys that have never played meaningful snaps. I mean, that's the issue, and people are killing Georgia about the run, which is statistics don't lie. They can often mislead though. You got to remember too, Georgia I think was 70th or something like that in the run last year. I think you turn to the Gators and ask them, can Georgia stop the run or not? When you're playing, when you close your season with Georgia Tech option, Georgia Southern option, and Alabama, Nebraska option, it skews it a little bit. Do they need to get better against the run? I definitely think they do. I don't expect to see them stone South Carolina by any stretch this week, and I think that but what they're going to have to do is get off the field, because Connor Shaw provides a unique issue that they saw last week. It's just he can't throw as well as Taj Boyd. Taj Boyd didn't run all over Georgia. He threw pretty well. I mean, Clemson was very balanced, but I do think it was disconcerting that you got 200 yards rushing. That's just too many, and that's why I think you saw the defensive line move around a little bit. Garrison Smith at nose guard should be interesting against the South Carolina center, who is young, first of all, who may not play because he's hurt, and if he does play, he's hurt. So Georgia should have some level of should be better. Whether it will actually look better on the stat sheet at the end of the game is a good question. I mean, South Carolina is a different team than Clemson. They're much more physical, and it's just a different level of competition. Now that sounds like a shot at Clemson. That's not at all what I mean. This game is a huge game, and Clemson, the way they play football is a little different than the way South Carolina plays football. And I think that's, unfortunately for Clemson, that's kind of bared out the last 4 seasons. So you got to be physically ready to confront South Carolina. Clemson has a few more wrinkles and wrenches they can throw at you that you got to be concerned about. South Carolina is pretty much straight at you, and that's a different kind of challenge. This question about Keith Marshall. I know Keith Marshall has some power, but he is clearly more of a one-cut speed guy. Why don't you think Georgia uses him more in space and toss sweeps and screens versus up the middle runs? At that time during the game when Keith was in there, you don't want to just do toss sweeps. And I know that's not what you're suggesting. That would be where Keith excels. I mean, he's a speed guy. But he's built physically fine. He can go get the job done in between the tackles. It's just that Todd can do it a little bit better in there. And on that touchdown run by Todd, the 75-yarder, that was a toss sweep. But they had stacked the box so much that once he was gone, he was gone. And that's the same premise when you run through the tackles. If you get a 3-yard run and you're still up and you're not falling down, you got a chance to make a big play. So that's why you run in the tackles. If you got a 3-yard sweep, you may have gotten a yard. So, and then there's this thing called pursuit. They can't pursue you if you're running down the middle of the field. So that's why you run through the middle. And what works one time does not mean it will work the next. I always hear people complaining about how predictable things are. Well, if you're predictable and you're scoring 35 points a game, you should continue being predictable, because if you become unpredictable, you might score 10. And Georgia's a lot less predictable than people think, and I just think that's a lot of sour grapes. That's me. I've been around the game for a while and covered it for a long time now. And when your team loses, it doesn't matter who you are. There's always second guessing, and that's just the way fans are. That's not anything new. This is a good example of some of those questions. Do you think Mark Richt should take the play calling back from Mike Bobo? No, that's not going to happen, and it should not happen. Why does Georgia under Richt always have offensive line problems? Well, for a while there, it was recruiting. There's no question. They picked up the recruiting, and if you're talking about an offensive line that scores 35 points a game, I don't know if that's really what I would consider problems. Are there things they need to clean up? Yeah, there are. There's no question about that. That needs to happen. When you miss out, a lot of offensive line in general, if you can get a left tackle, which Georgia really never has in the last 9 years, then you can set everything else, because guards are guards are guards are guards. And your right tackle, you can get away with playing somebody who's not a true tackle at right tackle. I mean, you can do that. So right now, Georgia has a guy who's not going to play left tackle in the NFL going up against a guy who's probably going to go with number one, if not number one, certainly top 5 in the NFL draft at defensive end, left tackle versus their DN. Now the DN should win that, and how you beat that is you make sure you're not in 3rd and 7. That's what you do, and that's really offensive line has not been Mark Richt's strength, but it hadn't been horrible necessarily either. I mean, you got guys that were good players at Georgia: Clint Bowling, Ben Jones, Cordy Glenn. They had some good lines. 2007 was a pretty good line. Those guys played in the league, but there was a time there when the team was losing that the offensive line really wasn't that great. Right now, I think this is a pretty good offensive line that got into a competitive situation, didn't score a touchdown on one drive, lost the game. I mean, it's not like they're not getting first downs. It's not like they're not putting up 550 yards or 35 points. Let's slow down with the killing the offensive line deal. Do you think it's time for Todd Grantham to scrap the 3-4 defense and go to the traditional 4-3 to stop the run? You know what? Todd Grantham knows more about football than all the people watching this right now. I'm not saying that the guy is perfect. That's not what I mean by that at any stretch. With the guys they got in the program now, you need to be in a 3-4. That's what you want to be in. Jordan Jenkins and Leonard Floyd, those guys are not. Those guys are 3-4 outside linebackers. That's what they do. And, the linebackers are in place. Now everybody was like, well, we're not going to miss, John Jenkins or Kwame Gathers. Yeah, there's a little bit of time that you're going to need to get used to what you want to do. And, there's Scoot and Garrison on the inside. I thought Ray Drew really had a pretty good game. 4 tackles. I mean, that's pretty good for a defensive lineman. I'll take that all day of the week. So, Georgia, Sterling Bailey played pretty well. So, I mean, it's gotta clean it up, man. I mean, 38 points is way too many points. I mean, that's 2 touchdowns too many at a minimum. And even as explosive as Clemson was, and always will be, I mean that's just too many points. So gotta clean that part up. But do you change what's worked the last 2 years? No, because you lost a 3-point game on the road. No, you don't do that. If you lose 50-0 to South Carolina, yeah, you start reassessing things then. When do you think is a good time to get Hutson Mason some snacks to prepare for next year, or is the quarterback job up for grabs next year? I think the best time for Hutson Mason to get some time to prepare for next year is in the spring. And, he can go win the job then. And he'll have to beat out, he'll be the incumbent, and he'll be the guy that Bryce Ramsey will have to beat out. And, that's going to be a tough challenge for Ramsey. But, look at Aaron Murray is the quarterback at Georgia. He's a very convenient scapegoat. He doesn't play well sometimes. Neither did Amaro Herrera when he dropped the pick six. That's got to be a touchdown. So, you want to beat up Aaron Murray, that's fine. You want to bench Aaron Murray. Murray needs to hear these sort of things because that's what you're going to hear in the NFL anyway. But the backup quarterback routine is, I just wonder if people think that the coaching staff that's getting paid at any level is really not going to play the best player at that position. I know in my job, I do what I think can let me succeed. I don't purposely take a gun and shoot myself in the foot. And I think the funny thing is just seeing sometimes after losses, the cliff jumpers or bridge jumpers, as I like to call them, with suggestions. That doesn't mean Hutson Mason shouldn't play sometime this year, but I'm not taking Aaron Murray out to put Hutson Mason in a ball game where, Aaron Murray is not hurt. I mean, Todd Gurley gets tackled on 1st and 10. It's a 2-yard loss. That means you put Keith Marshall in. So Georgia will take on South Carolina at 4:30 in Athens. Critical game. If they lose this game, Georgia loses the game, it's going to be a long season, and I think everybody knows that. There's going to be a lot of, we're not going to quit on this team. There's a circling the wagons business, and that's fine. Why don't you go ahead and make it easy on yourself and knock out the Cox, because they can still come back and win it. If Georgia loses, that's going to be a tough challenge. Okay, Dean Legge Show for the week of the South Carolina game in 2013.